Hello, folks. I'm Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the US, good afternoon. Good morning to those out west. And hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today's Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. With a curated white glove approach, MyGovWatch delivers leads in more than 200 industries at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts do not start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one, and your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per year. Start your 14-day free trial today. So, folks, here we are already zipping through the year, coming up on the end of May. And for those of you who have been with us in these sessions before, you know that I've been doing some backgrounds that are topical or timely throughout the year. This particular background, and I'll be asking you, maybe how you celebrated your Memorial Day. Recently, I had an opportunity to take the family to Europe, and this is a photo of my two teenage sons. And I guess over my left shoulder here, I don't know if that makes them the angels or the devils on my shoulder. But we had a chance to go to Belgium and we visited the Ardennes forest, specifically the Boisjac forest in southeastern Belgium. This is where the Battle of the Bulge reached its crescendo, and this is around Bastogne. For any historian buffs or military buffs out there, this is the forest depicted in the Band of Brothers miniseries way back in the year 2001. Long time ago, folks. So we have a lot to talk about today. Before we get too far into it, I will just say that, often we have co-hosts in these sessions. Today is not one of those days. So what that means is it's a little bit more laid back where I'm simply, reacting to questions that people have about government contracts. So I just really want to encourage people to raise their hands at any time using Zoom to start us off with questions. I'm going to get into the press releases that you see on screen here in a moment, or the most recent press release we did about, or literally a week ago. But yeah, so I'll just tell you that anyone who asks a question on this session qualifies for an extended 3-week trial at mygovwatch.com. Typically, if you go to the website, it says 2 weeks, but we extend it to a third free week if you've never been to the site before, if you've never used or had a free trial with us before. We can extend that out to a third week in use of the site. So I see a lot of people have already joined us. More people are jumping in. We're just a couple of minutes into the call here, or into the session. And I just want to jump right in and just talk a little bit about how this session of MyGovWatch Live was advertised. And we did a press release. We pulled some numbers together, and there were different ways we were looking at the numbers. Should we do it from January 1st? Should we do it for the first quarter? And then we finally settled on looking at the numbers in the first 100 days of the new Trump administration, because so much ballyhoo was made in the news about things that this administration has been trying to do in the first 100 days. We decided to follow suit and just use the first 100 days as a barometer for not what the rhetoric around spending and government contracting is, but what do the numbers really tell us? What do the numbers say? All right, so I'm just going to click on this press release. And so what this release tells us, and I'm going to drop a link to it in the chat in a moment, you could read it later, but essentially that there's a more than a 6% increase in federal government buying in the first 100 days of the new Trump administration. Now, I say and I emphasize the word buying because here's how we calculated it. We're not looking at the spending dollars in the first 100 days. That's not our focus here at MyGovWatch. We're at the front end, or at the top of the funnel, in terms of opportunities that are out for bid today. So looking at the first 100 days, the number of opportunities that are out for bid today, or out for bid on April 29th, between April 29th and January 21st and April 29th, is about 51,000 items. And most of that, but not all of it, is coming from SAM.gov. So there's about 51,000 items, things that were in the pipeline, where there's an active solicitation at play in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So if we go back to 2023, you have a different number. Our count here is over 45,000 items, and I'll just show you the parameters for that. That is looking at federal opportunities only, and that's where I have my cursor. And it's specifically looking at this date range. So this would be the equivalent 100 days in 2023. And then the same dates in 2024 show an increase year over year up to 48,000 items. And that's for the same dates in 2024. And then up to 2025, we're now just around 51,000 open and active solicitations for federal contracting opportunities in that first 100 days. So you might say to me, Nick, well, these are things that were budgeted during the last administration, and you would be correct. However, when we really look at the procurement regulations at play here, and we see the executive orders that have been put into place in the first 100 days, what you quickly determine is that all of these solicitations, almost every last one of them, is at the discretion of the executive branch. Meaning, the current administration could have, and probably has canceled some, and we'll get into those reasons why in a little bit, but could have conceivably canceled large numbers of these solicitations. But at the end of the day, the administration has not done that. Why is that? Well, and this is the message that we've been putting out there. And I just want to go back to the press release page here, the main page. And we have a press release from January 29th, where we say that where we presented federal data showing that we were anticipating that spending would be likely to increase, which is at odds with a lot of the news that you've been hearing out there. So why did we do this, and what is the point of all this data? Because the executive branch has a lot of authority to cancel solicitations individually, maybe something, a multi-billion-dollar solicitation for the military or some other part of the government, things can be canceled individually. Categories of purchasing could be canceled, right? So we saw an executive order, just to put a fine point on it. We saw an executive order in the first 100 days indicating that all purchasing, now here we are with procurement purchasing, all purchasing around straws, yes, drinking straws, could no longer be paper straws, but had to be plastic straws. So why do I bring up something that is a little silly, an executive order that I might consider, or others might consider a little bit silly? Well, the point is, if this administration had wanted to cancel large number of solicitations, it was certainly important enough to put an executive action out there, or an executive order out there, specifying that the federal government will no longer be buying paper straws, but plastic straws. So this is an administration that can do pretty much whatever it wants in terms of the purse of the federal government and the buying power of the federal government, or at least try to do things. Whether or not they're blocked by courts later is another question. So we focus on the fact that these are items that are in the active procurement cycle, which is divorced from what is the spending. So I point back to this January 29th press release because it also points back to a November session of MyGovWatch Live. And I'm going to put at some point during this session a link to our press releases. And you ought to read the one from last week. You ought to read the one from January. And you might take a look at the video from November, right after the election, where we went into great detail showing the spending, internal spending, external spending, starting with Obama 2, into Trump 1, into Biden. And I think the numbers that you would see in this November session linked here would support what we're saying. And that is, there's a lot of things being talked about in the news about federal spending, but mainly the things that make the news are considered by some to be controversial spending. The message that I have for those who are considering getting into government contracting, particularly and only federal contracting, because the state stuff, is pretty much consistent all year round, state and local, uh, is that there's a misconception. The misconception in the marketplace is that, well, federal government spending is way down. There's not the federal contract opportunities that there used to be. And that is simply not true as borne out by the data. So when we look at the numbers, we see that things that are not controversial, anything from um, polishing the marble inside of the Supreme Court rotunda to buying supplies for the military, hundreds of thousands of purchases. The vast majority of federal purchasing is not controversial. So what that means, it's going to continue. And the best any administration hoping to reduce federal spending, they will never be able to reduce it to the point that some in the media are describing in terms of their efforts or attempts at reducing it. All they can really do is slow the rate of that growth of expenses because there's inflationary pressure there. And we see in the numbers that it's just not true that the contracting actions are down. And you'll see in the video in November, if you go back to it at some point, that that the history of what happened from Obama 2 into Trump 1 into and through the Biden administration, the numbers just continue to go up in all areas of spending. So I would encourage you to look at that. Let me just take a look at the audience here. And let's just see. We have a lot of folks on the line. I would say now would be a good time for folks to ask questions. Typically, these sessions will go about an hour and a half. We have had MyGovWatch Live end just about in an hour, and we have had it go 2 hours. But by and large, it takes about an hour and a half to get through people's questions about different areas of what's happening in government contracting. So I'm just going to stop there, let people consider what questions they have, and look for people who may be raising their hands. And let me just take a look and see if there are any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I'm going to stop the share. Now we're back at full screen. And so, yeah, if you jump on with a question, I'll just remind you folks that you are entitled to a third free week for using MyGovWatch Live, for using MyGovWatch.com. And if you go to the site again, it's a 2-week trial. But anyone who participates in any way who's never been to the site and used the site before or tried it is entitled to a 3-week trial at that point, just for asking a question. So a lot of people on this session I could see already. I might have left you a voicemail if you had an interesting comment in your sign-up form. Reddy, I do see that you are on with us. I know we spoke a little bit earlier. Please raise your hand if you'd like to be brought on and talk a little bit about something, maybe an RFP that you're working on, and we can speak in a manner that's totally anonymous if you don't want to. Okay, there we go. We have a customer. So let me bring Reddy in. And so, oh, I might have done that to the wrong person. I brought in Courtney and I brought in Reddy, maybe two. Courtney, you're welcome to join us. That was, I can tell you, I might have fat fingered the mouse a little bit. Let me just see here if I can bring in Reddy. Oh, brought you both on. So Courtney, you can raise your hand if you want to stay in, or maybe I'll put you back in as an attendee, and then you can raise your hand if something.
Nick, can you hear me?
Yes, and if you could just stay as close to the mic as you can and speak up for the audience who may not hear you as well. So, Reddy, you can tell us a little bit about your company in broad terms. You can mention it by name or not. That's up to you. But just tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're working on.
All right. Can you guys hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we are a startup company providing data science and AI software solutions to enterprise companies. So our team, we have been doing this for over 15 years so far, and we have covered multiple industries across the nation. And most of our engineers are known for building enterprise systems. So that's the experience we bring in. right now, we are trying to submit some state projects where they require some data analytics or data science or AI services within the choice of their cloud choosing. Some of the challenges that we have right now is we are a relatively new company. We don't have any past delivered work through the company, but the people who are associated with this company, in this case, my team, we have very extensive experience and we can bring in those referrals to showcase our historical work. Would that be considered as company's evidence when we submit this RFP to the state project so that uh, we score points in the evaluation criteria? So that's one. And what kind of services does MyGovWatch provide for companies like us in guiding through this RFP process, given we know what we are trying to submit it for, but there are other logistics related to how we portray the information or what kind of things that we need to consider while submitting the bid. And most of these things are relatively new to us. We might know how to get the job done, but RFP process, it's entirely a separate discussion when we are working with the states. So these are some areas I'm looking for some guidance or help. Maybe we can connect offline, through your services, and interested in knowing about, what kind of services will be offered, what are the pricing plans, and all this stuff.
Well, Reddy, you bring up some interesting questions, and I really do appreciate them. And I think we can talk about them at length here. And by the way, while we're talking, folks, anyone who raises their hand, we will bring you on, and you can just add to the conversation. And we try to make it a very casual atmosphere. So, Reddy, I just want to I want to say this first. You are in an industry where the government has nearly unlimited needs. And so if you have capabilities to do things around AI and around data and data science, I think if those capabilities if you have some references around those capabilities, even if it's a newer company, you will find work. It's only a question of what is the path to that work. Okay. And so to your first question about past performance, in federal contracting, and these webinars and our expertise is not simply about federal contracting. So I'm going to give you a federal answer first, and then a different answer for everything else. Past performance is a capital P, capital P. It's a term of art in federal contracting, and I don't know that we're talking about federal contracts here. I'm just going to give you both answers. For past performance with federal contracts, it is certainly viable and acceptable within the regulations for newer companies to use the past performance of the individual key personnel who would be working on a project in order to show that the organization has the ability to perform on the work that's being requested. So I would not hesitate to use the resumes of individuals with
Yeah.
federal contracting. At the state and local level, it's all over the board in terms of whether or not they have past performance in their regulations. Some of them do, many of them or most of them do not. But they all have needs that they're having trouble meeting. And when I say that, what I really mean is I put the press release page on our website in the chat. We did a press release last March, so March of 24, and you'll see that if you click on the link. And that was a survey we did with government buyers. Ready, guess which area of purchasing government people told us over and over that they're having trouble getting enough vendors?
Everything related to technology and data services.
100%. So I would encourage you to not be shy about submitting bids, because if you now just and right, we haven't talked about like what your company name is or anything, but like how big are you guys? How many people do you have? Are they working domestically or offshore, for example?
Yeah, so we have a philosophy of running lean, mostly because our engineers are qualified enough to get multiple things done because that's the team we put together. So we are a team of 5 to 7 engineers right now, and we only operate within the United States. We don't hire anyone outside of the country. So that's where we are right now, and this is a single member LLC right now.
Okay. So, and are you bidding on something that's state or local now?
This is a state project that we are trying to bid for within the United States.
Okay. So, are there any requirements in terms of sometimes they will say something like this. You can only bid on this project if your company has done 3 state data science AI projects in the last 3 years. So sometimes in the RFP requirements, they will make an extremely specific statement that will draw a very bright line in the sand about who will be considered for the award and who would be considered not qualified. Is there anything in the RFP like that?
I mean, the only thing is they mentioned the cloud services and the tech stack they would be using, and they are looking for past 3 years of delivered work on these tools and services that they proposed in the RFP. But one thing it's not clear is should that be tied to the company or should that be tied to the individuals? So that's one thing was not clear. Um,
Yes. And typically they will give a due date for questions in the RFP. Have they given a due date?
so they have set up a webinar for next week. So I'm planning to attend that to answer to get through some answers on the scope, uh, the past work, and some unique situation related to our startup. Are we eligible and how would that process would look like to get a better understanding of what exactly they're trying to um, find because the instructions are valid enough to understand, yeah, can we do this work? Yes. Do we understand the timelines? Yes. But other things related to showcasing the work tied to the company, that's the only thing we are skeptical about. But other than that, uh, we can bring in what are the minimum requirements that they're asking for. So majority of their weighting for this process is how close your skill set is to our requirements. So that's literally 50% of the weightage. And we are more than overqualified in that section.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to attend that webinar at a minimum,
Yeah.
and I would encourage you to ask a question on the webinar that is very pointed and very specific. And you can even make it a leading question, right? So the leading question I would ask in the webinar is this: Can you confirm that past performance of the principals of the bidder is acceptable to meet your past performance requirements? And I would ask that question almost verbatim that way, because you're inviting them to say yes, right? In a way that sort of leads them down the road because they don't know whether they're going to receive 2 bids or 25 bids. And I think generally speaking, because the technology needs of government agencies are not generally being met by the market, I would think they would err on the side of not excluding you at this stage. So, but I would certainly go to the event, go to the webinar about the procurement, and I would ask that question specifically. And I wonder what you think of that.
Yep. Yep. No, I'll make sure to bring it up next week.
Yeah. And so we can do a couple of different things here, Reddy. You can stay with us, and I would encourage you to do it and just stay as a panelist because you might have a follow-up question. Let me just take a look here and see who else may have their hand raised. I do see a question or a couple of questions in the chat. So, Reddy, stay with us, and you can go on mute if you'd like, and I see you have. I'm going to take a couple of questions that were just sent to us via chat. And and then if you think of something sort of, as a follow-up to your question or someone else's questions, You can jump back in at any time. And I will just say before I take the questions that were submitted by typing, right, the Q&A, the typed questions, it's a lot harder to give really good answers to a written question. So please raise your hand, Emily and Ruby, if you're willing to join us. Audio at a minimum. We'd love to have audio and video. Looks like Ruby is willing to join us. So Ruby, we're going to bring you on now. Okay, and here comes Ruby. And Emily, I do see your question, and I have a really good answer for it. So please raise your hand if you'd like to go back and forth on it. Otherwise, I can still give you an answer once we talk to Ruby here. So Ruby, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you.
And please stay as close to the mic as you can and speak up for the benefit of the audience. What do you do? Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do, and where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from the Philippines. I'm a VA assistant from a company from the Florida, US. So,
And
yes,
what kind of services does the Florida company provide?
we provide HR services such as
I'm sorry.
leadership. We provide leadership development, HR services, professional consulting, and more on HR services. So my question is, does MyGovWatch has all types of services contracts in all states, and which state would you recommend that we submit most?
Does the company operate
We
throughout the United
operated
States?
3 years, but the experience of my consultant is almost 20 years.
Does the company operate in Florida regionally or nationally?
All states.
Okay. So, and we try not to make these sessions too promotional for MyGovWatch. I'll just answer that part real quick. So there's no annual contract. It's $89.99 per month nationally, $59.99 per month regionally, and it's easy to switch and it's easy to cancel and go to the free version if you just want one state and a couple of buyers. There's 21 buyer types. The free version is one state, and you can see like county, municipal, and state. But
Mm.
um, I would say that because we are not trying to get anyone to sign up for a year. We're not asking for people to pay up front for the year. I would say try the national version because
Uh-huh.
your client can always downgrade to the regional version at the lower price point if it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. But I think I would tend to bid in states where your client already has references. So does your client have good references in Florida?
Yes, she has.
Okay. Does she have good references in other states?
Yes, she also has.
Yeah, so I would target those states, right? But I think
Okay.
you'll get a sense of there's just massive need for what she does. And there's an entire category around HR and leadership consulting. So it just comes up all the time. And I'll just remind you, if you end up signing up for or helping her sign up this week, because you've asked a question on the session, it's a 2 week trial. We'll extend it out to 3 weeks. Um, so thanks for that question. And do you have any follow-up questions?
And so far I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, Ruby, why don't you stay with us and you can go on mute if you'd like. And if you think of a follow-up question, you can certainly ask it. And so we're going to move on to Emily now. Emily asks a question. What Emily's question is, rumor through the grapevine says the executive order that states all government purchasing will go through the GSA Global Supply should be in lawsuit by mid-June. Have you seen or heard anything concerning this? Well, I will say, as somebody who's been paying attention to the news in the first 130 days, that something going to lawsuit as a result of any policy change or executive order or anything that this administration does, it would not surprise me if everything and anything went to a legal challenge. It just would not. It would not surprise me. And I want to drop in the chat a link to a colleague's profile. So there is, and we're anticipating, and others are anticipating that the relative importance of having a GSA schedule contract will be relatively more important in the next 4 years than it has been in the last 8 to 20 years. Um, And so for those of you who do not know, the GSA, and some of you really, there are probably GSA contract holders on the session with us. But for those who are sort of new to all this, the GSA is the U.S. General Services Administration, and it is a clearinghouse purchasing department for the federal government, if you will, for larger nationwide scope purchases, right? So even if more purchasing will be going through the GSA, that doesn't mean all purchasing will be going through the GSA. So at a minimum, we're encouraging anyone who specifically wants to do business with the federal government to kick the tires on getting a GSA contract, particularly if you're able to supply and you can prove that you've supplied your products and services nationally. So whether or not it is in a lawsuit by mid-June, I think, I'm not someone who would predict on that timeline. But I'll also put in, I'm going to put two things into the chat right now. Let me do that. So the first is a link to a gentleman by the name of Josh Frank's LinkedIn profile. If you go back through his posts, I want to say it was in April. So you won't have to go back too far, but it's certainly not the first post or two. But going back in the last 2 months, you're going to find a post where he talks all about a paradigm shift in federal buying. And these are good colleagues of ours. We have, Josh and his partner, Michael Lejeune, on as co-hosts from time to time. I would encourage you to link up with Josh and follow his post and Michael Lejeune's post, and certainly look for that article about the future of federal purchasing, because you'll find it in early May or in April. So, Emily, hopefully that answers your question. The other link I'm going to put in the chat for you, Emily, is this, and let me just do it. Okay, so the other link is smallgovcon.com. Smallgovcon.com is essentially a federal legal blog around federal contracting. It's administered by the folks at the Koprinz McCall Patroff law firm, a federal government contracting law firm out of, I believe, Eastern Kansas. And also the partners of the firm are regular contributors and co-hosts on MyGovWatch at MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. So I would encourage everyone here to link up with Josh and Mike Lejeune at RSM Federal, read that article, and sign up for the email newsletter at SmallGovCon. And I think what you'll find, Emily, is that if there is a lawsuit in June, they will be writing about it. So looks like Emily's raised her hand. And Emily, we would love to have you on, so I'm going to promote you to a panelist.
Hi there. Thank you so much for adding me. I appreciate it. How is everybody?
Doing wonderful, doing wonderful. Emily, I try to inject some stuff that's not so stodgy and esoteric to these once in a while. How was your Memorial Day and how did you spend it?
My Memorial Day was decent. I just kind of hung out, had a very relaxed weekend, nothing too fancy.
Yeah, we try to do the same thing. My father is a disabled Vietnam veteran, and I always tell people this, like, for most people, Memorial Day is remembering our fallen veterans abstractly, but for him, it's remembering specific people. So it's always been a very subdued event in our family. So, but thank you for joining MyGovWatch Live. And what do you do and where are you joining us from?
So I am joining from Colorado Springs, Colorado, for a company that is called Access Products, Inc. We are a reseller to the federal government for a substantial amount of their commodities: office supplies, printer supplies, janitorial sanitation, IT supplies. And we actually currently hold 15 GSA contracts. We're a service disabled veteran owned small business of 14 people, and I am the sales operations director, and I do all of the bidding for the company. So I was really excited to join this, and the information that I had, the reason I had asked that question is because we just last week there was an event where they had actually spoke about it going into a lawsuit mid-June, and for everyone just to be kind of ready for it, because I know that's a huge transition, and I know there's a lot of people that were upset with that executive order. So I just wanted to see, if you had heard anything through the grapevine, because they fly through in this industry.
Yeah. So in terms of the lawsuit, I would just echo what I said earlier, and that is, it wouldn't surprise me. Someone smarter than me once told me that anyone can sue anyone else for anything at all at any time. And I would think that, not just for political reasons, right? You have both sides of the aisle. For more than just political reasons, for practical dollar and cents reasons, it would not surprise me if some in the other party, in the Democratic Party, made common cause with vendors who may be negatively affected by moving more to the GSA. And certainly that it would not surprise me if there was a lawsuit pretty soon around that, because that is a big deal, right? So the GSA has been around a very long time, and it's not surprising that that this administration would move more things to the GSA because of the belief that with economies of scale, the pricing may become better and better the more things go to the GSA. Now, does that create challenges for giving, contracts to small business? Certainly, there may be pressure in the other direction for that. Or will there be challenges because they may be over bundling requirements to do business with one very large company as opposed to 4 or 5 smaller companies for what one large company might be able to do itself? Certainly that's the case, but I would think that I would expect to see a lawsuit. I couldn't tell you when I would expect to see it.
No, I completely understand. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting to me that you have the number of GSA contracts that you have, and that you have, a total focus. Is the company's entire focus federal contracting?
It is, yes. We have tried to expand into state, local, SLED is what I call it. But I have learned that people who are in the state purchasing, once they find somebody they work with really well, they're typically not willing to budge. We have tried to bid multiple opportunities, and our pricing is just nowhere competitive to some of the other competitors that are strictly state, local, and education. So we are, I would say, 99% federal government always.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and I wonder if the fundamental cost structure, the difference in what the federal government pays for different products and services. I wonder if, that's really what's driving it. Do you ever do open records requests at the state and local level to see like who did win and at what pricing did they win?
We have requested that and have not been very successful. We will get a read receipt that they read the email, but then nothing comes from it. So, and we've tried to follow up, and it just was not in our favor, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. We have been doing open records or FOIA requests in our office for over 20 years. And that's actually a service that we offer. It's an incremental, so you could subscribe to the site $89.99 per month. It's a line item in your budget. But particularly at the state and local level, because as you know, at the federal level, it's just very difficult to get information. We are very successful getting pricing data at the state and local level. And I think it's fundamentally because if they ignore us, then we're in a position where we can tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you can't ignore us. And they can't hold it against us, because if a customer like you, if you were using the site, asks us to do an open records request for a state or local contract, we don't take no for an answer up to the point of where, lawyers may need to get involved, which hardly ever happens. Typically, if we submit an open records request, we have the information we're looking for, within 6 months. So keep that in mind as you consider whether or not you would be looking at state and local contracts. For those of you in the audience who don't know what kind of information you can get through a FOIA or an open records request, here's what you can get. And this is almost always at the state and local level. Federally, it's a little harder, but you can get some of it. You can get a copy of a signed contract, which tells you all the business terms of the agreement, whether it's products or services, and it will include pricing. A copy of any evaluation documents that explain or that show who all the bidders were, and often the pricing of each bidder. Subjective comments, if it's a service, right, and it's not just based on price, a lot of times you'll be able to read subjective comments about what the different evaluators thought of each bid and their proposal. So not only are they giving you feedback through these documents, if you choose to receive those documents through an open records request, you not only learn what they think of your company, but you also learn about the dynamics of the competitive pricing scenario among different companies. So it's a tremendously valuable way. You can even get a copy of the winning proposal. So especially in a service business, imagine reading your competitors' proposals. It's all available through open records, and we make it so that you can do them anonymously through the site. We're the ones asking for the information. So Emily, I'm not sure if that's of interest, but it sounds like you've hit some pretty high barriers doing them yourself.
Definitely. What I will do is after this, I'm going to look into, obviously, if I can get approval to sign up. But if it's okay, I'd like to reach out and possibly ask some more questions on the best way to go about requesting those and who really to kind of reach out to.
Yeah, I like communicating with people who are using our site, especially, but I hear from people every week who just have questions about different things. And my attitude is whether you're using our site or not, if I can give you a piece of information or point you in the right direction, it's just more brand awareness, and you'll tell people who need to hear about bids and RFPs to check out MyGovWatch. So appreciate your involvement. I do. And Emily, please stay on with us. Like, you might have a follow-up question based on what someone else says. So you're already a panelist. I'm going to leave you in that status. But do you have a follow-up question now?
Not as of right now, but it'll probably hit me here in a little bit.
Okay, stay with us. I'm going to go to Trinity. So
Thank you.
Trinity asks a question, and she put it into the Q&A chat. Trinity, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to read this question out loud. And if you raise your hand, I'll bring you on as a panelist, and we can go back and forth on it. So I'm going to just make sure I can see whether or not you're raising your hand here. So Trinity says that her LLC provides IT services for the USDA, and there have been a lot of layoffs and full-time employee buyouts over the last 3 months. No surprise there. Now my LLC is the last contracted resource left on the project we support. The USDA departments are currently under a hiring freeze, but ironically are now short-staffed in many areas. Have you heard anything regarding when the hiring freeze for contractors may be lifted? Does this freeze vary from one government department to another? Unfortunately, Trinity, I can't speak to when any hiring freeze would be lifted. And I suspect that there probably can certainly be some variations between what this administration would allow, USDA to do if with any hiring freeze versus branches of the military or other federal government agencies. So it would not surprise me if there is a blanket freeze, from time to time, depending on what they're trying to do. And it also would not surprise me if they give latitude for certain departments to do different things up to, but not beyond whatever constraints or restraints they may put around those policies. So, Trinity, if you'd like to go back and forth on that more, please raise your hand, and I'd love to have you on and talk about this a little bit more. So we have a question from Lisa. And Lisa, raise your hand if you'd like to jump in, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But Lisa's question is, do you have to bid on a contract to request the open record of that bid? Great question. The answer is no, you do not. And here's why that's particularly important, and here's why our customers use us to do it. The anonymity portion of us doing an open records for a customer is hugely valuable, because sometimes, people being who they are, we may send in an open records request for a customer, and they might be good friends with the vendor. or you may send one in and you didn't bid on the contract. They have a legal obligation to fulfill that request, but they can certainly then tell their customer vendor, hey, Lisa's company is doing an open records request on this contract. Now, the reality is the public owns that information. You're not doing anything wrong. It's actually something that they must do. But it would not surprise me if that created a scenario where the other party or other parties didn't like it and maybe took different actions, maybe doing open records requests against you or any number of other things. So yes, the short answer is yes. You do not have to bid on a contract, or no, you do not have to bid on a contract to request the open records for that bid. And let's just see who else we have here. Michael, I see your questions are about settlement consulting, assisting lawyers, judges, government agencies, insurance companies settle claims by way of addressing needs to reduce the exposure using an annuity product. So, Michael, I did hear from one of your colleagues, and I never quite understood like what the connection was. If you think there's a connection, we can certainly talk about it offline, but I don't necessarily, if you're not bidding for government work, I think, we're glad to have you on the webinar. I'm just not sure what back and forth we might have if you're not interested in bidding on government work. So hopefully that helps. All right, let's just see who else. We have a hand raised. We had a hand raised. It's really interesting. Oh, we have Derek. Derek, my man, let's bring you on.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay. Derek, welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from the DC area, a little north of Bethesda, Rockville. And we are an IT company providing solutions in cloud and services and CRM and sales. We have some industry customers, and from time to time we get to sub in the federal space, but I'm looking to start priming and getting some more business in the federal space. So my question was, how does the outlook look? How is the outlook for government spending on IT related solution contracts? That could be services, that could be implementation, that could be design. How does that spend look, even though, there's a lot of noise about where money's going, but I'm just looking for facts, not noise.
Yeah, I mean, I would point you back to the press release we did in January, and it's in the chat. There's a link to our
cool.
press releases if you join late. We did a press release on January 29th, and in that press release, it links back to a session of this event, MyGovWatch Live from November. And if you link to that event and watch the YouTube on that, you will see that the spending has continued to rise, not just from the second Obama administration through the first Trump administration, it went up. Then Biden, it went up. And the data we're seeing shows that there's not necessarily going to be big changes in federal spending. If there are big changes, the split between in-house and external spending may favor external spending. And certainly because of things that are being said publicly about making government more efficient, to the extent that we can really do that, will certainly be driven by technology. And are you a small business?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any other certifications?
No, other than self-certifying, no.
When you say self-certifying, what are you self-certifying as?
Oh, small business enterprise.
Okay. So, and are you a principal in the company or are you working for the company?
Oh, I own the company.
You own the company. Okay.
Yep.
So the federal certifications that are out there are small, right? That's a self-certification. Disadvantaged.
Not that.
I'm sorry?
We don't fall into that category.
Okay, then
Yeah.
there's HubZone. So
I
forget-
looked into HubZone, but the addressing was not really. The addressing didn't line up in terms of the last time I looked at it.
Yeah.
Where our physical office is located in DC is sort of like a few blocks away from like the actual outline on the map.
Yeah. So I would say that, if you're an IT company and how many federal projects would you say you've worked on as a sub?
Oh gosh, if you take my own experience with a previous company to date, probably more than 10.
Okay. And are any of those, so this is your company, and how long has your company been operating?
New company actually came into being this October 2020, like right during COVID. And we actually did pretty good.
Okay. And so does your company have contracts through your company as a sub?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. How
E-
familiar are you with something called the OSTABU office at a federal agency?
Yes. Office of
Okay.
Small Business Utilization or something like that. Disadvantage and okay, yes.
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 And how familiar are you with the idea that each federal agency publishes a contracting forecast of future purchases that they believe are coming up?
I am familiar. I think on my biggest challenge is your site's great. It's really helped me get a better insight as to opportunities in the federal space. Like we're listed in we have a cage code. We're listed in the small business registry or the SAM. We have a SAM registration. We have a cage code. My biggest challenge was trying to navigate that, understanding that it's different than the way I navigate my commercial customers. So, and we've had some pretty big commercial customers, and we've been involved in some pretty large um, federal contracts, like Amtrak, for instance. So we basically managed like all of their CRM Salesforce rollouts for probably about 6 to 9 months. And that was a pretty substantial set of projects where we weren't just doing one, we were doing multiple projects at the same time. We've done New York City parks, more design type stuff. But I'll be honest with you, most of our stuff has come on the commercial side. Like we have a multi-billion-dollar pharma we work with, entire Salesforce rollout for that, managing all of that. It's just understanding how to navigate, how to sort of translate what we're doing on the commercial side and navigate successfully on the government side. That's been my biggest sort of challenge.
Yeah, but you've been a subcontractor on 10 different projects federally.
Yeah, at least 10 between my current company and my previous company that we closed and then restarted. So
Okay.
I had probably like maybe 20 years experience in the federal space at NASA, at DHS, a few different
Okay.
organizations.
And let me just explore this a little bit.
Sure.
Because believe me, there are people out there who would love to just be a subcontractor on a federal contract. What is driving your interest in being the prime contractor?
Is just revenue. I mean, I'm happy to be a subcontractor as we have been, but I'm trying to grow my business a little larger. So it's really more in terms of company goals. But there's nothing wrong with being a subcontractor on a project as well. I'm not like looking down on that because both are equal to me. Both are equally important and both help us meet our overall, I would say opportunity goals as a business. So I'm not saying like, oh, I don't want to sub anymore. Oh no, I would do that. We did that for Amtrak and we were quite successful, and the revenue wasn't bad either. So so it's not like I'm looking at one over the other. I'm just looking at, to be honest, on the prime side, it's just a matter of opportunity and bigger revenue, and that's all.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not like a preference for like some people say, oh, I don't want to sub. I'm looking at numbers, and
Right.
so not
And
attitude.
let me ask you this question.
Sure.
So there's a concept in federal contracting of the recency of your federal past performance.
Yes.
How many federal subcontracts have you worked on in the past 3 years?
In the past 3 years, I would say one,
Okay.
and that was Amtrak.
Okay. And is your prime contractor, your partner on that, is that a company that if you use them as a reference, would they give you a good reference?
Yes, in fact, we were directed to them through a third-party staffing company that told them to talk to us.
Okay. And now here's the $1 million question, or actually, that's probably too low of a number for federal
Okay.
contracts. Here's the $10 million question. If they gave you a reference, would they effectively be competing with you on every federal contract that you pursued? Or is it just as likely that you would compete on something that they wouldn't really be interested in?
One might, like the company that we ultimately were working through, the other would not, because they're just a global staffing firm and suggested that they come to us. The good news, though, is that at Amtrak, we were able to garner our own references anyway from the specific managers and people that we directly reported to and worked with.
Yeah. All right. So in that case, I would try to get a letter of reference from your prime contractor on the Amtrak deal.
Yep.
Yeah, try to get them to date it today, or make sure it's dated, right? So
Right.
you know that the work is recent. And I would be looking for projects by talking to the OSTABU at different federal agencies and looking at the forecasting that they publish by federal department and
Mm-hmm.
seeing what's coming down the line, what lines up with what I do, and how can you use the OSTABU to get that person to put you in touch with the business or the future business users of those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be looking to use the prime contractor as your reference
Mm-hmm.
in those deals. And I would be picking 2 commercial customers if they're asking for 3 references, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Probably have 2 very recognizable. You mentioned a pretty large, I think, a pharma company. So
Yep.
I would pick 2 commercial customers, but I would lead with the Amtrak project and use the OSTABU and the forecasts that are available at the federal websites, the department level websites, to identify what's coming down the line and just try to meet people.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah,
Another
go ahead.
question for you. Is there any benefit to, like, what's this called? I'm still learning the terminology. So it's not like RFIs, for instance. Is there any benefit in those in terms of providing information for that, where it's not really necessarily a done deal, or you're not necessarily the preferred choice, but as a way of informing the folks who you might be and what you could do for them?
So are you referring to sources sought notices?
Yes, because there
Okay.
was one at DOJ that was interesting, but then all of a sudden, like, the date changed for it. This was sort of like early January, like, new administration coming in, everything's like shifting around. And so I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that it was on the books in the SAM, and then something happened where the date that they said that you had to deliver the RFI, it just basically said it would be extended, and then you didn't hear anything else about it. I probably didn't follow it any closer after that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to talk about sources sought notices generally, and
Okay,
then we'll
cool.
circle back to this item. But before I do that, Keena, your question will be answered next, so stay with us. So Derek, about sources sought notices, we are huge fans of telling, particularly small businesses, if you see a federal sources sought notice, here's how you should interpret that. That is an invitation to influence purchasing decisions later. What do I mean by that? It's an invitation not only to answer the questions in the sources sought notice, where they might be asking, like, do you have these capabilities? It's an opportunity to suggest requirements based on what you've read. So if you have a certain capability that's unique, you might say, well, you might consider making this a requirement of your bid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, knowing that very few companies have that requirement. Another thing you might be able to do through the sources sought process is, if you're a small business, which you've told me you are, or if you were a hub zone business, for example, you might say, hey, we're a small business. There's a lot of small businesses that do this kind of work. You might consider restricting this to small businesses only. But you would certainly always be looking at the sources sought process as an opportunity to do some pre-selling to the government in a way that can definitely influence decisions they make about the manner in which they put something out for bid. So I'm a huge fan of using the sources sought process for that reason. And then in terms of the specific project you're talking about, it would be impossible to comment on like the dynamics that would cause them to change a date or change a policy around it.
Right.
But is the solution that they're looking for, is it controversial?
I didn't think it was. I mean, it was basically out of DOJ, out of the pardon department, the group that does pardons, and they were looking for a way to modernize it, because as per their description, it was kind of like legacy. It was, it was like not a way to do it. It was very manually done.
Okay. I would say that it's just a matter of whether or not the federal government's decision point around, and I'm speculating, but their decision point around that might be, well, when do we put this out, and do we bundle it with something else? Do you have a GSA schedule contract?
No.
Okay. I would be looking at a GSA contract if I were you, and you're able to do work nationally, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. I would be looking into getting a GSA contract, and I would be definitely responding to that or that sources sought when it comes out, because if they change the nature of it, what you may find out is they're bundling it with other requirements, or they might just kick the can down the road because they want to do something else first. But I would certainly be looking into a GSA contract if I were you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and why don't you stay with us, Derek? I mean, you can certainly go on mute if you like. Typically, these sessions will go till about 2:30 Eastern, so we have another half hour. Stick with us. I'm going to take a question from Keena, and then Emily, I'm going to come back to you. I'm assuming that you raised your hand intentionally. So Keena says, do you get service contracts for marketing and/or event management services? The answer is yes. And when you say you, I assume you mean, will you see those on the MyGovWatch website? Absolutely. We have 205 categories on the website. There are like 5 different marketing categories. So it's not just like marketing. It's marketing and advertising. It's digital and website development. It's public relations, graphic design. And then for events, there's an entire category around events as well. And there's demand for that at all levels of government. And then the second part of Keena's question was, or has there been a halt from federal government agencies as opposed to the states, and do you cover all lower 48 states? Here's my answer to that. Don't look at what's happening federally as being a sign of what's happening with state and local purchasing. If anything, if there are certain federal things that are not happening or that won't happen, dollars will certainly flow to the state. So 2 good examples of that, and I'm not speculating, and I'm not certainly expressing an opinion on this. If they do close the Department of Education and Congress approves that, then more dollars will flow to the states, and states will be spending those dollars. Another example would be disaster management, right? And what happens if there's a disaster? Dollars will be spent. It's only a question of who is spending them. So, and yes, we're covering the 50 U.S. states. MyGovWatch.com is covering all 50 U.S. states and territories. So hopefully that answers your question, Keena. And please raise your hand if you have a follow-up question. We'd love to bring you on live. So thank you for that. And Emily, if you intentionally raised your hand, could I ask you to come off mute? And there you are.
Yes, I did intentionally raise my hand.
Yes.
I was just going to put my 2 cents into Derek's question in regards to the seeking sources.
Please do.
I respond to those consistently, and I will tell you, I highly recommend people to respond to everyone that they can possibly support, because I have seen it where it was in a seeking sources status, and I responded, and they didn't put it out for compete. They just awarded it directly to us. So that's just a 2 cents from my end. I absolutely tell everybody, respond to seeking sources. They're totally worth it.
You know, Emily, you remind me of my favorite joke that relates to government contracting. And it goes like this. There was a man who was lying in bed, and he prayed to his Lord. He said, Lord, please let me win the lottery. And he started doing this every night before he'd go to bed. Lord, please let me win the lottery. He did this for several weeks. And then after maybe 3 months of doing it, he heard a booming voice from the heavens. Why don't you buy a ticket?
Okay, that's a good one.
Why don't you buy a ticket? And I think the analogy is there's so many people who have an interest in government contracting, and typically one of the first things you should do is like just bid on something. Now, there are different people out there who will say, you should never blind bid on a contract. And there's certainly reasons why you should try to meet people in advance. But what we find over and over again, and your anecdote is just one of those anecdotes, is there are thousands of them. Sometimes just showing up carries the day. Sometimes submitting an offer carries the day. And in your example, that's certainly what happened. So I love hearing stories like that, because there's certainly a place for trying to meet a bunch of people and ghosting requirements, but at the end of the day, somebody puts out a bid, you can meet that need, submit an offer, you might win. Okay, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you. I appreciate you letting me speak on that.
Yeah, my pleasure, So we're just at about an hour. Let's just see here, an hour and almost 10 minutes. Yeah, once again, these sessions typically go for an hour and a half, but we don't force it to go an hour and a half. MyGovWatch Live can die an organic death. So if that, is what is happening here, if people are sort of out of questions, that's okay too. So I'm just going to stop there and just take a look at the Q&A. Let's just see if there's anybody who's typed a question. Let's see if there's any hands that are raised. And I don't see anything else. So we're going to do last call. Last call for MyGovWatch Live Q&A. All right. Well, it looks like that's
Hey,
it.
Nick.
Yes.
Yeah, ready here. Is it possible for me to connect with you via email so that I can send some targeted questions related to
Yes. Did you receive my
bidding process?
email earlier today?
Not yet.
Okay. Can you check your spam or junk? And you could do that now if you'd like.
Yeah, check it. No, I don't see anything from you.
All right. I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we get blocked at the server level. Maybe it's because we send out so many marketing emails. Let me just put my email address in here. Okay, and make sure I spelled it correctly. Yes. So, Reddy, are you able to see that?
Yeah,
Okay.
got the email, so I'll send the questions your way.
Yeah, please just send me a note, and we can certainly schedule some time to talk. So, folks, if that's it, I sure do appreciate your time. Let me just check one more time here. And again, I have more time, but I don't have any more stories to tell unless people have questions. So I'm going to say that's it, folks. That'll do it for today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. Remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your free 14-day trial at mygovwatch.com today also. If you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad you did. And thanks, folks. Have a good day.